Hi, everybody. Hey, Jeff Atone. It's Friday, and you know what that means. It's Shitty Album Fridays. And for those of you who are new, Shitty Album Fridays is not about bad records. It's about records that are your favorite musical guilty pleasures that you love to listen to, no matter what the format, no matter what system you're listening to. They're just records that you can never get enough of. As always, our show's brought to you by the folks at Verify Audio and YG Acoustics. This week, we also have a new sponsor, Audio by Van Alstyne, and they make some very, very excellent, moderately priced, high-performance amps, preamps, and DACs. So thank you very much for sponsoring our show. Today, we're going back to the two-person format. We're going back and catching up with my pal, Sean Zloch, who lives in Chicago, and Sean and I both got a chance to hang out a little bit at Expona and talk about all things music, hi-fi, and dogs, and photography. So Sean expressed interest in coming up. He's a huge record collector, so it was nice of him to zoom in with us, and we're going to go back and forth a little bit about the Kinks. Sean, great to see you. So today we're talking about the Kinks.
We are.
Always a guilty pleasure. So I'm going to let you go. I'm going to let you start, man.
Oh, sure. I don't know how guilty pleasure some of the Kinks is. There's a lot of reverence for their 60s records in particular. All the hipsters like Village Green and stuff like that. I like the 70s stuff, although that's probably because I was exposed to that first. If there's a miserable, dark period of the Kinks in the 70s, it was the early to mid 70s where they're making those really god awful musical records, like musicals.
Right.
Theatrical ones. But I will say the first one of the bunch, which I picked here, a soap opera, is actually still a pretty great Kinks record, despite the cheesy kind of musical format that it has. Ray Davies can still write a great song, no matter how bad the context, I suppose.
Oh, always, definitely.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. That's kind of when I got exposed to the Kinks too. And then I went back and rediscovered the early stuff. And I
The good
didn't,
stuff.
yeah, and I didn't even at the time, because I was so young back then, I didn't know some of those songs. I didn't know they were the Kinks at the time.
Yeah. Oh,
You
yeah,
know,
same here.
so and I remember seeing the Kinks in Milwaukee, Milwaukee Auditorium, and when it was on the low budget tour, and Ray Davies came out and he said, "And now we're going to do a little Van Halen number," and they did. They really got
You
me,
really got
which
me. That's
that
great.
that cheeky British thing. So, hey, what's your favorite cut on soap opera?
I think You Make It All Worthwhile is actually a pretty great tune. I think most of side one is great. Rush Hour Blues, 9 to 5, stuff I can relate to a lot now as an adult, going to work. You
Yes.
know,
So, and again, I mean, it's one of those records that, you've been listening to it forever, but it's one of those fun go-to records.
yeah. I think there's a lot to be said about records you hear when you're younger, as opposed to when you're older. Case in point, I have all this stuff behind me. So when you buy a record now, if it doesn't grab you, oh well, there's another one to grab. That's not a problem. But when you're younger, you got like maybe a couple albums a year. So the ones you got, you played the hell out of.
True,
You know,
definitely. And you went into the record store, and maybe that day you could only buy one record,
right?
you
I mean,
know?
that was the thing back then. It wasn't until the internet became kind of a thing, so to speak, with all these different music forums and stuff like that, where I learned people actually hate the Eagles in the long run. It was one of the few albums I had growing up, so I just played the hell out of it because I had it. It's all I had. Or one of the few things I had.
Sure.
Because it was my first Eagles record. I played the hell out of it. And you get online, people are like, "Oh, it sucks." You're like, "Oh." I always assumed it
Right.
was good.
And
you
that
know,
being said, did that affect your judgment of still liking or not liking that record?
you know what? No, I still enjoy it. I enjoy it with the kind of awareness that I know it's not peak Kinks. But it's still a lot of fun to hear, and it still means more to me than a lot of other albums that I have.
There you go. There you go. Well, and as I hinted at a minute ago, My guilty pleasure Kinks record is Low Budget. And I mean, and again, dude, I've got to do a deep clean here because I have three copies of that record. I've got a record, an essay, a MoFi essay CD, and a cassette, and I can't find either one of them. So I'm just gonna hold up Rune where I've been streaming it, because I mean, I
Yeah.
just listened to this the other day, and this 79, maybe you'd agree or disagree, but this, to a lot of the critics, this was probably on one level one of the most popular later, like kind of Kinks comeback records.
Oh yeah.
But it was also kind of one of the cheesiest. It was the most pop of all the Kinks records.
Disco in spots.
You definitely, yeah,
Felt like
wish I could
Superman.
fly like Superman, and for me, Low Budget was always my theme song,
Oh
it's
yeah. It's still my theme song.
so I'm on a low budget. What did you say? And low budget and oh God, and Run DMC's It's Not Funny, you
Yeah.
know. But that's another guilty pleasure for another day. So yeah, I mean, I still, I think I don't have an original pressing of Low Budget on vinyl. I think I just have an Arista pressing,
Yeah.
like a later Arista pressing, and it's kind of, it's
Yeah.
not
It's not great.
not a real good sign. But you know what? It's still, that was one of those, that's where my cassette came from. I transferred it onto cassette,
Oh
and
hell yeah.
I used to play the hell out of that in the car all the time.
Yeah, my
So
sister had the 8-track. Heard that a lot growing up. That's a great album.
nice. So yeah, and that
I
was,
grew up with it.
79, that was probably the end of the 8-track era.
Close to it. Yeah, gotta figure it, right? A few more years left, but that's peak 8-track anyways.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I would totally agree.
I'm
So
sure I'm sure
hey,
my sister bought that stuff on 8-track for two reasons. A, to play it in her car, and B, so
yes.
I couldn't scratch it. That's probably the other reason why she
Nice.
bought the 8-tracks.
Yeah.
So
You
I
know,
was a small kid at the time, so yeah, she would have, yeah, been annoyed by
it
that.
was little brother proof, right?
Yes. Oh God. I still get grief to this day over certain records.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Oh yeah,
talk
me,
to her.
you and me both, So anyway, dude, thanks for sharing your King's Choice with
Yeah.
me. And we'll be seeing you next week with our next two selections.
Yep.
So great to see you. Thanks. And
Yeah.
thanks for everybody in the audience for dropping by.